All right. Hi, my name's Ella Halbert. I use she, her pronouns. I go to Oberlin College in Ohio, and I went on the Ecuador Comparative Ecology and Conservation program in the fall of 2021. Wow, that's a hard question. Yeah, so the program really focused on a lot of the different ecosystems that are in Ecuador. So one of the coolest things was all the excursions that we got to take. So we spent about half of our time in a hostel because it was during COVID, so we didn't have homestays during my semester, but half of our time was in a hostel kind of close to Quito, taking classes that were more like lecture style. But I think the real highlight of the program, that was the excursions. So about every other week, we would go for 5 days or 8 days to the Andes, or we would go to the Amazon or the cloud forest. And we also went to the Galapagos for a week, which that was a total dream come true. I've got the map or a map from the Galapagos on my wall here in my dorm room. But yeah, for someone who really loves being outdoors and likes learning about nature, those excursions were just the most incredible thing. So the staff, we had an academic director, Javier Silva, a program director, Diana, and we had a couple other professors who would teach some classes. We had Ana Maria, who did a lot of like entomology, or not, like insect science and stuff like that. So the staff was kind of a smaller group, and we got most all of our content like for lectures and things from them. And they also went with us on those excursions. So I'd say the majority of our like content learning was on those excursions, on hikes. Every now and then we would stop and we'd learn a lot about different plant families or important ecological interactions, or like how humans had impacted a certain ecosystem. So they were definitely super involved, and we saw them all the time. I think they were really knowledgeable, and we were definitely encouraged to ask questions at all times. And it was really exciting because when we did ask questions, we would often be at the site. So if we wanted to ask, oh, well, what does this species tend to do in this scenario? Or like, how does it forage? We might be able to see that species and talk about it. And they definitely have a lot of experience going to all of those places. So they're very familiar, and they could handle just about any question that we had for them. It was, well, I expected it to be like a lush tropical landscape, which if I really thought about it, I wouldn't have expected that. But it was like barren at first. It was like all dry and brown. But I guess that's what makes all the exciting wildlife so interesting there, is that they've adapted in really cool ways that just really speak to the really unique environment that they're in. And I think there's so many like incredible species there that, you try to like check off the list, like, oh, I saw the blue-footed boobies or the flightless cormorants. But I think my like very favorite part about it was how close we got to the wildlife. We had to keep a certain distance. You couldn't get, I don't know if it was like 10 feet, but you couldn't get super close to the wildlife. But when we went snorkeling, we got to see all these really incredible fish, and some sea lions actually like swam with us. And I had never been snorkeling nor seen a sea lion before then. So it was just crazy how close we got to be to those really cool species. Yeah, so my independent study project was in the cloud forest at a research station called Sumac Kausai in situ, SKIS for short, skis. And I think most of the researchers that visit tend to be herpetologists or interested in frogs, reptiles, snakes, but researchers of all kinds come and visit, and a couple really interesting people came and visited when I was there during my ISP, so I got to hear from Lou Jost, who's a really famous orchid researcher. He's discovered and described a lot of species of orchids in Ecuador, which is really cool. A retired geneticist from Stanford came as well, and it was just cool to meet other people there. But my actual project was on frog biodiversity. So I went with an expedition team. We were 8 people, and while I was there, we spent 1 week doing a backpacking trip in an unexplored region of the national park that's right next to the research station. So we went basically up a mountain over the course of 7 days. 6 days, and we came down all in 1 day, which was pretty intense. But I looked at the different frog species that were at the different elevations to kind of see how the different microclimates or how elevation might be a factor in determining what species exist in the park. And the crazy thing is that we found potentially 7 new species, as in unknown to science frogs, while on the trip. which is just incredible. It was super short, like 7 days. We went up a relatively short elevational range, but we were doing a lot of surveying at different heights, and we just saw so many different species. Um, I think I cataloged 41 species over the whole expedition, um, which is a really high number, especially considering the small area that we surveyed in a small amount of time. Um, so really huge yield for the sample effort size. And yeah, I basically just found that there is a big difference in what frogs you're going to find based on elevation. And it's interesting if you look a little bit at some of those species that you can tell that they replace like the same ecological niche. As you go up, you might find a different species of toad, but you no longer see the first species of toad. So you're finding like really interesting comparisons between the environments. I think it definitely helped me grow as like both a person and a researcher. I think I had a pretty unique ISP in that I had that backpacking expedition. I had never been backpacking before or even camping really. So definitely a lot of personal growth and overcoming challenges that like I never would have imagined doing. And in terms of the content itself, I'm really interested in frogs and I definitely want to learn more about them, like here in the States, because all of my frog knowledge is about tropical frogs in Ecuador. So now being back home, I'm really curious to learn more about frogs here. I don't know if I'll continue it in like a formal research setting, but I've definitely got my eyes peeled for amphibians. One program with them is probably also feeling similarly. It, might show up at different times or in different ways, but for me, it was really helpful to just talk with other students and kind of comparing like, oh, like, how are you dealing with this? Or just talking about things that maybe we were kind of reminiscing about. Like we happened to be out of the country in the fall, so over Halloween, we talked about like things we'd done on Halloween in the past, or we organized some of our own like little mini events. So I think the cohort as a group can be really helpful for that, but also we used WhatsApp pretty much for like phone calls and texting, and it was really reliable wherever there was Wi-Fi. So if students are wanting to like call home or talk to them, it's definitely a possibility. And for me personally, that's something that's really helpful is like talking with people back home, family and friends. Um, but I think especially once you get into like the routine of the semester, there's so many things to do that like your attention will be focused on kind of where you are. At least that was the case for me. And I didn't feel quite as homesick towards like the middle and end of the program. General notes, just highly recommend going abroad. And if you do, I think just being in the moment is super important and just kind of taking stock of where you are and being grateful for all the incredible opportunities that you get. I think I'm still like processing like how cool it was that we got to go to the Galapagos, or like, did I appreciate that enough that we got to see that really rare species? So I think, yeah, just make the most of it, whatever that means to you.